Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for joining me on a busy night and a busy week. I know there are a lot of preparations probably underway. Could you give us a sense of what the implications of a government shutdown are on a practical level, for example, to air travelers?
Well, it's just a matter of time before chaos in Congress would lead to chaos at the airports. Each passing day that a shutdown continued, it would become harder and harder to maintain the systems and the processes that keep our transportation systems running. As your story noted, and as America experienced in the last shutdown, one thing that would happen immediately is that air traffic controllers stop being paid. I want people to think about the level of intensity that is associated with a job where you go into a tower or a facility and make sure that 16 million aircraft a year at the end of the day get to where they're going safely. There's a huge amount of tension in that job. And to come to that job with the added stress of coming from a household where your family doesn't know where your next paycheck is going to come from is unthinkable in terms of, well, I guess it's not unthinkable anymore because this Congress and extreme Republicans in the House conference seem to be willing to let it happen yet again, to force it to happen, really. But it's certainly unacceptable. Another thing that would happen immediately is that we would have to halt bringing on new air traffic controllers. Now, if you've been following any of what's been going on in air travel in the last couple of years, you know that we have a shortfall that has built up over many years that we finally turned around and are getting in the right direction. In other words, we're hiring at a pace that it's beginning to get better and not worse. But that would also stop. People at the Air Traffic Control Academy in Oklahoma would be sent home. And even a shutdown lasting a few days, we'd be feeling the effects into next year in terms of the disruptions to our pipeline. Those are just a couple examples from aviation alone, but across transportation and across this country. A shutdown like this is something that we can't afford. There's no good time for a shutdown, but right now, when we've finally seen air travel delays go and cancellations get back to normal territory, cancellations this year actually below what they were pre-pandemic, and we're fighting to get them even lower than that. This is the exact wrong time to reverse that progress with a politically motivated Republican shutdown.
Yeah, I think it seems like, Republicans at least may be framing this mentally as just kind of bureaucratic inconvenience. But hearing you talk about it, this is the safety of people traveling throughout the United States, whether it's the FAA, which is facing, I think, a double government shutdown because there's a deadline to renew the law that basically establishes the agency. The TSA, which was very vulnerable. Those workers were very vulnerable in the last shutdown. Not having enough TSA agents to make sure that flights are safe. I mean, there are real practical safety implications for the decision to shut down the government. And yet, I would love to get your thoughts on the decision of Oversight Chair James Comer to deem his staff to be essential workers, to keep up the impeachment roadshow while House Republicans dither and refuse to make a deal that could prevent a government shutdown. What does that tell you about the priorities of the Republican Party at present?
It's insane. I mean, here we are, something like 50 hours from them shutting down the funds that we use to pay air traffic controllers who make sure that 16 million flights a year take off and land safely. And they're busy with shutdown. They're busy with impeachment they don't even know what for. They just want to have one. This is their idea of how to spend their time. Sometimes I'm watching this stuff go on, and I'm just thinking to myself, do they understand that this is not a game, this is not a show, and this is not practice? This is the actual legislative body that actually governs the real military and government of the most powerful nation on earth. This is not an exercise. They're it. They're the only Congress we've got. And you've got it dominated now by a group of fringe Republicans who are preventing Speaker McCarthy from being able to invest his time in delivering the deal that he actually made. Remember, the Speaker of the House and the President of the United States already made a deal over how to handle this spending, precisely designed to head off this situation. They made that deal earlier this summer, and now the Speaker can't seem to follow through and deliver it because of these fringe Republicans. By the way, Also, some of the same Republicans in the House in those committee rooms who tried to politicize some of the problems that they're now making worse. You know, last week I was up on Capitol Hill. I was testifying in the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Several of the House Republicans there tried to attack the administration over the East Palestine derailment in Ohio, making no mention of the fact that they are demanding cuts to railroad safety inspections and are threatening the government shutdown in order to get their way. There were representatives who tried to politicize staffing shortfalls in air traffic control. One in particular, who I saw on TV this morning, saying that he's going to keep taking his paycheck because he doesn't think of himself as wealthy, even though he's actually a millionaire. But he didn't think there'd be a lot of sympathy for federal workers like the air traffic controllers who are about to go without pay because of their actions. And he's somebody else who voted to cut air traffic control earlier this year in the so-called Limit, Save, Grow Act that Speaker McCarthy moved through the House. So it is absolutely upside down in terms of any sense of priorities. We need them to be working on keeping Americans safe and keeping American transportation systems and the rest of our government running. And yet they're devoting their time and attention when they're not busy fighting each other in this shutdown drama to impeachment inquiries over they can't even say what.
You know, you noted the cuts House Republicans are demanding to rail inspection. I think it would lead to 11,000 fewer miles of rail track inspected by the Department of Transportation next year. That's what House Republicans want as part of all these negotiations. I do have to ask you, because the Biden administration seems to sort of draw a line between Kevin McCarthy and the MAGA wing of the caucus. And yet, I sort of, on its face, I understand that distinction. But Kevin McCarthy is a tool of the MAGA right wing at this point. The reason there is not a deal, the reason the government may shut down is because Kevin McCarthy won't make a deal with Democrats. Because if Kevin McCarthy makes a deal with Democrats, Kevin McCarthy isn't Speaker of the House anymore. Is the statesmanlike thing to do, if you are Kevin McCarthy, to basically throw yourself on your sword, understand you won't be Speaker anymore, and keep the government open?
Well, you know, I can't tell Kevin McCarthy what to do. He's not going to call me for advice. But I know this. He's the Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives for the whole country. And he has a responsibility, and the Congress has a responsibility, to take care of the whole country. Now, he's also the leader of House Republicans, which means, I guess, he owns everything that comes out of that conference and that caucus that seems to be at war with itself. But the rest of our imperfect government system is pretty much ready to go here. The president's ready to go. The Senate, even on a rather bipartisan basis, has made it clear that they're ready to act. House Democrats are ready to go. It's really just down to whether House Republicans can, first of all, make peace with each other and make peace with their leader, Kevin McCarthy, and then get right with the rest of the country. But we're running out of time. We have hours left before these effects start to happen. And you mentioned this, I don't want to get too technical, but you mentioned this kind of double whammy that could be coming for the FAA, because we're also running the FAA on a 5-year authorization. We're in year 5 out of 5, and there's only a couple days left in that authorization, too. If both of those lapse because of the chaos in the House Republican conference right now, that means that some of these effects won't be easily reversible. Some of the funds that will be lost that would ordinarily come into our fund that we use for improving physical infrastructure at airports and making safety improvements, we don't get that back. It's not even clear that some workers impacted would get their back pay, which thankfully would happen to many of the other workers affected by a shutdown automatically, but not in this case. So this is just no way to run the most powerful country on earth. They've got to come to their senses. They've got to get to work. They've got to do one of the most fundamental jobs of the United States Congress, which is to fund the government.
Yeah, and as you remind us, it's not a rehearsal. It's not an improv group. It's not a puppet show. It's the actual Congress they're in. They need to do their jobs. Also, P.S., Republicans fly too.